Hi guys, welcome back to my voice type series. Today I'll be moving up in pitch a little bit to the baritone voice. Now this one will be interesting. Okay, so a baritone can be kind of tricky to identify sometimes. Generally, essentially it's the middle voice for a man. It's the middle voice that a man can have. And the middle of their voice is where they truly excel. It's where their passaggio is. So between a kind of midway through the third octave and low in the fourth octave, that's where most of the baritones will be singing most comfortably most of the time. The trickiness comes into it because sometimes they can have a deep tone, a deep, thick, rich tone, not quite as much as a bass, but still pretty deep. Or sometimes they can have a much lighter tone. It kind of depends. It's more about where they can sing. Some baritones can sing rather low and rather high, but excel really in neither area. They generally do most of their best work in the middle of the voice. So as I say, the third octave, bit of the second, bit of the fourth. So there's a lot of versatility, but they really excel in that middle part, and that's where most of them sing most of the time, most comfortably. For example, I'm a baritone and I can sing in the second octave and in the fourth octave, kind of a few notes into each, but I can sing most comfortably by far in the third octave. That's where my voice really sits naturally, it's where I've got the most practice. It is also worth mentioning that a baritone is by far the most common voice type, particularly for a man. Well, obviously for a man, but it could also be the most common voice type just at all because there are so many baritones. However, you won't hear it on the radio all that much anymore. Why? I'll get into that a bit later, but yeah, very common, but you won't hear too much of them in the music industry at the moment. Another way to identify a baritone voice is by comparison. So let's look at a really popular example of the Korean boy band BTS. Now, they have four singers in their group, and one of them is called V. Now, if you listen to the other three singers, they're all tenor voices, higher voices, lighter voices, but as you can see in this clip, V's a little bit different. So what makes his voice different? It's blatantly richer and deeper and thicker in tone than the rest of the three guys, which shows he's got a lower voice type, but he's nowhere near bass deep, despite what some people might try and tell you. So yeah, you can tell that he's a baritone or has a baritone voice in comparison to the other three. And this can happen in a lot of ways, like in a cappella groups, you can tell a thicker voiced guy that isn't doing the bass lines is the baritone. So what is the average range for a baritone? Now it's kind of hard to say because as I say, baritones are really versatile and there's a lot of different subcategories to them. So some can go a lot higher naturally and some can go a lot lower naturally. But a good place to look at it is around the F sharp 2 to the F sharp 4. Some will put it a little bit higher and some will put it a little bit lower. This is kind of a good place for most baritones and a lot of them would sing in that sort of area. It is worth mentioning that in the fourth octave, they would sound a lot thicker and more powerful, like than a tenor voice would, because they've got more weight to push up, and it would sound sometimes a bit more forced, a bit more raspy, but they can get up there and it's very strong. But it's also worth mentioning that they're much easier getting to these pitches than a bass would be. So a bass could try and struggle, whereas a baritone would have a bit of freedom above the C4. It's also worth mentioning that in the lower ends, the second octave, a baritone could project, at least in most cases, nowhere near as strongly as a bass could. So the F2 would be more like a duh, like a quiet low note. It wouldn't be like a duh, like a bass's would be. Obviously, you can practice to beef it up, but naturally, a baritone, when they're going into the lower range, unless they're particularly good at it, isn't that strong. It's just a lower extension, whereas a bass is that's where it shines. So that's where the differentiation comes in between those two voice types. Okay, so being a baritone can be a blessing and a curse. A blessing because often we have the widest vocal ranges of most voice types due to obviously thickness down low and ability in the higher registers. But it's also a curse because we don't have those three money notes, which are kind of your A4, B4, C5 sort of areas. At least we don't have them naturally. You can work towards them, but it's not something we have just innately in ourselves. So that means that we don't kind of get found in the music industry as much as we could do, or at least used to, because obviously the musical landscape has changed and high notes really sell. And those three notes are kind of the tenor's ballpark, and it's not ours. So that's why you don't find too many of us anymore. Okay, so back to strengths. Now, a baritone's main strength, as I said, is in their mid voice. So they're kind of middle chest notes to their kind of lower belt, upper chest range for them. Because of the range and thickness and power they have, these notes can sound really strong, really projected, and really great. It's also worth mentioning that some baritones have good ability in the second octave. It has been known for some kind of lower sitting baritones to be able to cover a higher bass part with their tone because it's so thick. Not everyone can do that, but a lot of them can get down there, at least at the bottoms of their voice. Another place a baritone's voice really shines is at their absolute top chest note or a mixed note, depending on how their coordination sounds. So, like an F4, in some cases a G4. For example, on Michael Bublé's "Let Me Go Home," it can sound really nice at those pitches because that's kind of the top of their chest dominant register, and it's kind of where their natural belt shines. It sounds really nice. Frank Sinatra also did this in a million different songs. But yes, that's kind of our money note. The F4, F4, and G4. That's a few decades ago where a lot of notes used to be and a lot of high notes used to be before tenors kind of took over. But yeah, so that's the main vocal strengths. They're good in the middle of the voice, a little bit towards their higher belt, and then the lower octave, depending on the practice I've got in there. Another place a baritone can sometimes be really good in is the mask player's head voice look. So the yeah. That's kind of because it's a mixed coordination, and a lot of baritones have an easier time to connect their thicker chest voices than somebody with a light voice would do. So they have a kind of an easier time beefing up that coordination due to obviously their thicker voices, and that can kind of translate upwards and make the high notes more powerful and more umphy. That's not really a word, but there you go. Not every baritone can do this. It is somewhat limited to baritenors sometimes, but I'll get to that in a little while. But people like Damash and Brendan Urie can do this technique a lot, and obviously I can do it too, just because we have a thicker tone which we can connect upwards from. It's quite a useful little skill to have. As I said, not everyone can do it, but it is a skill that some baritones do have. So a baritone voice can do a lot, right? Yeah, it can, but there are also some vocal weaknesses. As I say, we have a lot of notes, but we don't have those money notes that sell right now. The A4, B4, and C5. Unless you want to kind of flip to a falsetto, which is fine, but a bit dull, or a head dominant mix that takes a lot of years of practice, you're not going to have that coordination too well, and you're not going to have those notes, which means, unfortunately, we don't really sell commercially anymore. Mind you, Lewis Capaldi's a baritone and he's making a comeback, so maybe, who knows, we could be back shortly. I have no idea. But yeah, those notes there are a particular weakness for us because we have no natural coordination up to really get there and to make them sound powerful, like obviously some tenors can. Another weakness we kind of have sometimes is some baritones have little to no real ability in the second octave. They just kind of have a thicker voice that kind of sits in the third. Again, we'll look at V from BTS. He has a thicker tone, but he doesn't really sing down the second octave like at all. So whether that's due to Big Hit, the record company for BTS, not letting him write parts down there, or whether he just can't do them, I don't know. But some baritones genuinely can't really sing down there too well and have a lack of ability in those areas. They just more kind of excel in the third octave and sound thicker and deeper. Also, some baritones, I have a habit of doing this sometimes. Try and push those F4s and G4s and try and make even higher notes and make them too big, and try and push sounds that are too big up there. So if you get like your ah and then try and push it, it's just going to be disastrous. The consequences are going to be terrible. So yeah, it's just something to keep in mind. But some baritones do have a habit of pushing too big sounds too high, and it doesn't end too well. Okay, so let's look at some subcategories. There are absolutely loads of baritone subcategories, like so many, but I'll just go through some of the main ones, which these are the ones kind of branch off from. Obviously, we mentioned the bass baritone last time, so I'm not really going to go over that again. A main one is a lyric baritone or a light baritone. So these people have kind of a regular similar range to a baritone, maybe a little bit higher, but their tones are a little bit lighter, or they kind of sound a bit sweeter and a bit softer. They can still do kind of similar stuff, but they kind of sit more in the upper third octave rather than the lower, and they kind of do more higher stuff. But they have a baritone range. They lack the upper extension of a tenor, making them not tenors, but they do have a lighter tone. Okay, a dramatic baritone. Now this is entirely the opposite. These guys have a more thicker, darker tone, and they kind of excel in places that some baritones don't go to too often. So they can get their lower notes kind of the same as a regular baritone, but also a few notes lower, and obviously they can beef them up a little bit more due to their thicker, more powerful tones. So these guys can sing like strong F2s and G2s rather than breathy, airy, small ones. So that's a dramatic baritone. And another big one's a baritone. I've already mentioned that now. These guys are either a baritone or a tenor that in some parts of their voice display characteristics of the other. They can be hard to kind of identify sometimes, but people like Brendan Urie and Dimash, who I mention all the time, are these. They kind of have a higher sitting voice at a tenors, but they also have like baritone low notes, or they have baritone low notes and have more tenor high notes. It just depends. But they are one or the other, but they can kind of fit into both places depending on the song they're singing. So, where do baritones fit in the music industry? Unfortunately, as I've said, we don't really fit in pop anymore because of the demand for high notes that we simply don't have. Decades ago, people like Frank Sinatra and all that were like commonplace. Baritones were around all the time and everywhere, and for some reason that just isn't a thing anymore. Maybe one day we'll get back to it. It's hard to say for sure, but they do exist. Another place that baritones actually do exist are in choir music. A lot of them are kind of like leads because they have the most versatile voices, and the tenors doing the higher parts, the bass doing the lower parts. A cappella is the same. Scott Hoying from Pentatonics is their lead singer pretty much, and he is a baritone. Gospel music has a fair few baritones, as does a bit of opera. A place that has a surprising amount of baritones is heavy metal music. Obviously, they've got like kind of low tuned guitars and kind of really heavy sounds, so you need a bigger, thicker voice to sing over them. Bands like Avenged Sevenfold and Five Finger Death Punch, not really a great band, but there you go. They have baritone lead singers, as do people like Metallica. So the baritone voice does exist, just not really in contemporary pop anymore. Okay, so let's look at some baritone voices. Firstly, let's look at Frank Sinatra, the quintessential, most classic, most famous baritone voice. Listen up. Okay, so Michael Bublé is a more contemporary one. He exists. He loves to release a Christmas album every year, the same one, which I actually own. He's another old school swing style baritone who has the voice you'd expect. Then we'll look at James Hetfield. He is probably the lead singer for the most famous metal band in existence, Metallica, and obviously he sings over a really heavy accompaniment of instruments, and his voice is really thick and powerful. Let's listen up. Okay, thank you very much for watching this episode. The baritone is kind of the most common voice type, so if this does fit you and you've learned something new about your own voice, awesome, great, that's fine. Next time we're looking at the tenor voice, so stay tuned. Thank you very much, and see you later.